This happened in the summer of 2010, when I was just entering my teenage years. My family took a trip to a really nice hotel in the city. I can't really remember why we decided to take the trip, but I remember a lot of family friends coming with and staying in adjacent rooms. I've never asked my parents, and it's not really important to the story. To preface, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat and always have been. I'm a pretty skinny, fragile kid, so I get spooked pretty easily, even now. This, however, was almost definitely not me freaking myself out like I normally did. Looking back, I'm incredibly lucky I trusted my instincts. This hotel had a strange design to it. The lobby was actually on the 4th floor, not the bottom floor, which I found strange. To access the lobby, you had to use the elevator. There was no way for you to get to it from the stairs. This information would have been nice before everything happened, as you'll find out. The hotel was organized in a square shape. Every floor was lined with a balcony, and you could look down into the lobby and cafe area from your floor. Essentially, if you were walking to your room, you could be seen from anyone that was on your floor if they just stepped out of their room and looked around. I was always afraid I'd fall over the balcony and sail down 8 stories to my death, but they were high enough to a point where I wasn't too concerned for my safety. The first day or two was nice. My friends and I hung out and played cards all day, or we watched whatever was on TV. At night, we'd explore the halls of the hotel and tell each other ghost stories. It was a really fun time, even though I didn't fully understand why we were there. On the 3rd day, though, things got strange fast. I woke up to the sound of screaming coming from outside my door. Now, because of the hotel's design I mentioned, sounds from the lobby would echo all the way up to the top of the building. So, when I walked out to investigate, I immediately looked over the balcony to see what the commotion was about. I saw a girl laying on the ground, eggs and milk splattered everywhere around her. People were rushing to help her, and I heard a couple people telling each other to call 911. It seemed like the girl was unconscious. Maybe she had passed out or something. I scanned the lobby and saw that my family and a couple of my friends were in the lobby getting breakfast, all staring at the event in front of them. I decided I'd rush down to meet them and find out what had happened. The elevator was on the opposite side of my floor, so I took the stairwell located right next to my room. We were on the 7th or 8th floor, so I knew I only had to take about 4 flights down. Not a big deal. I descended for a little while, looking for the number 4 on the wall or the letter L. I passed floor 5, ready to find a door to the lobby. I took about 2 more flights of steps before realizing that there hadn't been a door for the 4th floor, nor had there been a door for the 3rd or 2nd. Now, at this point, I probably should have turned back, but I continued down because I was tired and didn't want to climb back up. There were some weird side hallways that went into pitch black areas with a bunch of piping and wiring, and though I was curious to explore, I passed them by. I quickly hit the bottom floor, a dimly lit and cold room with cinder block walls and concrete floors. In front of me was a set of double doors. I hesitated at first, but I assumed that this was just another way back to the lobby, so I opened them and entered. Behind the doors was a massive warehouse-type room, probably the size of a smaller basketball stadium. The only light coming in was from the stairwell behind me, so I really wasn't able to see much. Stairs were stacked and covered in plastic wrap. Tables lined the wall, and in the distance I thought I could see boxes stacked and lined against the wall as well. It was probably the storage room for the hotel. I looked around and saw an elevator in the back of the room, so I made my way towards it. I closed the door to the stairwell and began to walk in the dim light. The room was super muggy and dusty, and it seemed like nobody had been down there in a long time. As I got closer to the elevator, I noticed it was a little bigger than the elevators in the lobby and other floors. I pressed the up button, but got no response. There was a card swiper next to the button. Must have been for employees only, I thought. I turned back towards the stairwell doors, making my way past the chairs and tables along the wall. When I got to the door, I gave it a tug. Locked. Of course. This is when things started to hit me, and I realized I was stuck in the dark, dusty basement of a hotel. I didn't have a phone because my parents wouldn't let me get one until I graduated middle school, so I couldn't call anyone. Everyone likely assumed I was still asleep in the room, so I began to freak out, believing that nobody was going to look for me. I searched around the warehouse looking for other ways out. Some areas of the place were better lit than others, so I looked around in areas I could see first before starting on the darker side of the room. There was one other set of doors that I found, but it happened to be locked as well. I began to cry, scared that nobody would ever find me in this basement. I swear it felt like hours, but I think only a handful of minutes passed by before I heard the door creak open. It wasn't the door from the stairwell, rather, the second door I had found. A slim, middle-aged man in a lab coat came out of the doors. Now, if this was 21-year-old me seeing this man, I would be very confused as to why this guy was wearing a lab coat in a hotel. I was only 12 or 13 at the time, so I immediately was relieved at the sight of an adult who looked smart. I approached him, tears in my eyes, and he immediately looked surprised to see me, as you'd expect. "What are you doing down here?" he yelled. "I got lost on my way down to the lobby, and I've been locked in here. Do you have a key?" I was shaking, eager to get out of there. He didn't answer my key question, and instead he said, "I know a way out of here. Follow me." He began to walk towards the doors with the stairwell, and I followed, relieved that someone had finally come to save me. We approached the doors, and I began to reach for the handle, but he continued walking. "Isn't it right here?" I asked him. I will never forget the look on his face when I said that. He looked nervous, and though it was dim, I could see sweat glistening from his forehead and behind his glasses. "No, this way," he said sternly. I continued to follow him, but I was now nervous myself. We had passed the door to the stairs and were now headed towards a darker side of the basement, away from the elevators. He looked like he had no clue where he was taking me, as he kept checking around him, almost as if he was taking in his surroundings for the first time. We turned a corner and began walking towards the boxes, a dead end. I immediately froze, realizing that something was very, very wrong. This guy had no idea where he was going, nor did he appear to work at the hotel. I said, my voice shaking, "Okay, where are we going?" He turned and said, "This way, just follow me." I knew that there were no doors by those boxes. I had checked there first after I found out the stairwell door was locked. I want to thank whatever God is up there for gifting me with that idea I had next. I started yelling, as loud as I could. I yelled so loud I gave myself a headache. The man, irritated and plugging his ears, began yelling back at me, "What are you doing? Be quiet!" I continued to yell. I don't even remember how long I was yelling. Finally, the man snapped and began quickly walking towards me. I went in a full sprint towards the stairwell doors, hoping to God they'd somehow be magically open. He didn't run after me. He walked sternly behind me, muttering things like "stupid fucker" and other kind compliments. I was about 5 feet from the door when somebody burst through. My savior, a hotel janitor who had heard the screaming from the stairwell. He saw the situation, me and some random guy in a lab coat in a locked basement, and immediately told me to get behind him. The janitor asked me who the man was. I said I had no idea, that he had come in through the door on the other side of the room, and I pointed to the door. The janitor quickly radioed into the desk that he had found a child in the basement, and quietly, so that I wouldn't hear, he said, "This man came from outside. Get security," or something like that. The man in the lab coat started trying to argue with the janitor, claiming that he simply was looking for a bathroom. The janitor clearly wasn't buying it and kept saying things like, "Wait till security gets here and talk to them about it." I was standing beside him the whole time, trying to take in what was happening, confused out of my mind. Eventually, an employee from the front desk arrived and took me back up the steps to the lobby where I met with my family, who surprisingly had no idea I was missing. I told them the story, crying and shaking, and they hugged me tightly, thanking the employee over and over for their help. I never got to thank that janitor, though. Looking back now, I have absolutely no clue what that man was doing in the basement. I don't have any information as to what happened afterwards or who he was. I know for a fact that the incident with the girl in the lobby was unrelated, something about low blood sugar, not sure. I've thought about that day a lot, and the only explanation I can put together is that the door I had found in the basement leads to the streets of the city where he must have wandered in from. I have no clue what his intentions were, why he was wearing a lab coat, or why he chose to pretend to know a way out. To be frank, this could have just been a huge misunderstanding of some sort, and I just chose a really bad time to get lost. But all I know for sure is if I hadn't screamed my lungs out, I might not have been telling this story the same way, or at all. So, strange man in a lab coat wandering around a dark, dusty hotel basement. Let's not meet.
Right after I graduated high school last spring, I started working at the motel in my small town. Being the only motel in about a 40-mile radius, we got a fair amount of traffic from truckers and tourists passing through to see the points of interest in rural Montana. Things like the Lewis and Clark Trail. The job didn't pay much, but no job in town did, unless I wanted to work on a ranch or farm for incredibly long and hard shifts. The motel, the gas station, or the pub were really my only options. Plus, my parents knew my boss pretty well and got me started at $1 an hour more than most maids. My days were simple. Every morning I would wipe down the front desk and chairs, vacuum the entryway rugs and carpet, and stock the vending machines before going to my assigned rooms. In each room I would change the bedding and start the laundry for the new sheets, pick up the room and throw away the garbage, vacuum, wipe down the tables and lamps, and clean the bathroom. It was mind-numbingly easy work, and usually I was done by 2:30 in the afternoon, some days 4. Truckers are a messy breed. Being from a town so small, nothing ever happened, nothing important anyway. I was determined to save up enough money that by the end of the year, I could go to Montana State University and leave my sleepy hometown miles behind me. I was so bored that it made my teeth ache. Other than truckers and tourists, our motel is notorious for being a weekend getaway for couples who had husbands and wives back home. If you were having an affair and didn't want your small town to know, you could come to ours for the weekend and get away with it. Most of us only left for grocery shopping, and that was maybe a couple of times a month. 2 days ago, half of one of these couples checked into room 6. When the man showed up, she had apparently already left. They had been regulars here, coming about once every 2 months and staying Friday and Saturday night. When he'd showed up, I was stocking the vending machine. As my manager handed him his key, he said, the other one already checked out. Said she had something to take care of. I hadn't seen the woman leave, but it's possible she finally got cold feet or her husband found out where she was. The man furrowed his brow. She texted me like an hour ago and told me she was here. My manager, Gary, shrugged. Sorry, maybe she'll be back. But she returned her key before she left. The man grunted and rolled his eyes before heading to his room. I glanced outside and noticed her car was gone and shrugged it off. Yesterday, I went to room 6 to change the sheets around noon. I knocked, but got no answer. There was no "Do Not Disturb" placard on the door, so I opened it and went in. The room was empty, bed still made, though there was an indent like someone had sat on it. I straightened the sheets and checked the bathroom. None of the soaps had been disturbed, but there were some gnarly track marks in the toilet from a shit long since flushed. I cleaned the toilet and the sink, and I was about to move on when I noticed something under the bed. I kneeled down and picked it up. It was a woman's earring. One of those cubic zirconia ones from Walmart that's supposed to look expensive but instead looks cheap. I figured the lady who left must have dropped it. I brought it to the front desk. Hey Gary, found this under the bed in room 6. When he saw it, his eyes widened a bit. Oh, it must be from the last tenants in there. I'll call Felicity and see if it's hers. Instead of assuming it was the ladies who left suddenly, he assumed it was the local hookers. I found it a bit odd, but dismissed it. Gary and Felicity were old friends despite her chosen career, and he probably knew her jewelry better than I would. I handed him the earring and started cleaning the reception room. As I was cleaning the windows, I noticed the man from yesterday's truck still parked outside. Hey Gary, that guy's truck from the room 6 is still outside, but he didn't sleep in the room, I said. He hesitated for a moment. Yes, I saw him leave with Felicity last night. Figures, the man came for pussy and he was going to get it no matter what, I guess. I finished my rounds and by 2 p.m., I was free. I went home, showered, and changed out of my work clothes when I realized I had forgotten to grab my paycheck. I drove back to the motel and got out of my car, noticing the man's truck was gone. I went in and noticed Gary wasn't at the front, so I started my search for him. After 15 minutes of not being able to find him, I called. His phone went straight to voicemail. I waited in the reception room for another 5 minutes and was about to leave when Felicity pulled up, Gary in the passenger seat. There was a worried expression on his face, like he'd been caught doing something naughty. "Hey kiddo, forget something?" "Yeah, my check." "Oh, right, let me grab that for you." I followed him into the reception room as Felicity drove away. There was a small office in the far back that Gary kept locked. We weren't allowed in, ever. He said there was a lot of important paperwork in there that he couldn't afford to get messed up. I waited outside, but the moment he opened the door, an atrocious smell wafted into the air. I nearly vomited. As he brought my check out, I said, "Why don't I clean in there Monday? It smells like something died." His face paled. "Oh, no, I can get to cleaning it over the weekend. Don't you worry." One thing Gary did not do was clean. Like, ever. "Are you sure? I can add it to my morning rounds," I told him. "No, Melissa, thank you," he said sharply. I threw up my hands. "All right, have it your way." I grabbed my check and left. Today I drove to the town over to cash my check. While in the bank, I noticed the bulletin board had a missing persons poster on it. As I approached, I realized it was the lady who came into our motel a couple of weeks ago. Apparently, she had never returned home after her stay with us. She had met up with a much younger man, and apparently her husband and kids were now worried. Her last known whereabouts were at the bar in this town. I drove back home, and for the hour-long ride, I had a nagging feeling in my stomach. Finally, I called the non-emergency police line and let them know that her actual last known whereabouts were at the motel. They thanked me for the info and said they might follow up. I decided to go back to the motel and tell Gary about the situation. When I arrived, I again couldn't find him, so I opened the door to his private office. To my surprise, it was unlocked. In the center of the room was a ladder leading up to the ceiling. I glanced around the desk, papers and receipts littered everywhere. The smell was even worse in the room, and I had to swallow hard and hold my breath to keep from vomiting. I noticed a picture of Gary and a lady, his ex-wife, sitting on the desk. My parents had told me the story and said to never bring it up. Gary's ex-wife had cheated on him and left him for his nephew about 15 years ago. As I studied the picture, I saw that the wife's eyes had been scratched out. I looked around but couldn't find the source of the smell. Baffled, I returned my attention to the ladder. As I climbed the rungs, the smell got worse and worse. I moved the ceiling tile over and popped my head through. Wooden planks had been added for support along the ceiling. Support of, I suppose, body weight? I thought Gary must be a perv, a voyeur that liked to spy on Felicity getting down with various truckers. As I crawled in, I followed the smell. It's not unheard of for an animal to crawl into warm buildings when it's cold out, get stuck, and die. My thought was that a raccoon or something had found its way into the ceiling and didn't find its way out. I was wrong. My nose led me to a spot over the laundry room, where the clean scent of laundry detergent mingled with the smell of a rotting carcass. As I searched with my phone flashlight, shuffling on my hands and knees, my finger touched something cold and squishy. I shined my flashlight to my hand and saw an ear. I screamed, louder than I even knew I could. I shook my hand off and began to cry, and then I vomited all over myself and the mutilated body part. I was close to passing out, but I willed myself to stay conscious as I began scooting back towards the ceiling entrance. My flashlight caught a glimmer as I moved back, a glimmer from the ear. A cubic zirconia earring dangled from it. I'm on my way to the police station now, but it's an hour-long drive. I'm frantically writing this in voice to type. Gary was calling me nonstop, so I blocked his number. But there are headlights behind me, and they're getting closer by the second. The headlights look just like the ones from the truck the man in room 6 drove. I'm still 20 minutes from town. I'm pushing 100 miles per hour, but the truck is still getting closer. I sent my parents my location. I'll update soon.
Sorry, this is a long one. This happened a few years ago, but I still think about it to this day. I was on holiday in a city on the other side of the country celebrating my 21st birthday with my best friend. We were having an amazing night out with a few too many drinks and ended up meeting 2 guys. Let's call them Andrew and Billy. They seemed like really cool guys, and we were into them, so when they asked us back to their hotel room, we said yes. obviously a silly idea, but we were young and drunk. Things were great on the way back to the hotel room. We were all laughing and having a great time. When we got to the hotel room, there were two other men there as well. Let's call them Ricky and JD, who were at least 10 to 15 years older than us. They gave us creepy vibes, but we brushed it off. We asked Andrew and Billy who these guys were, and they said they were their colleagues as they were in the city for work and the company paid for their rooms. So Andrew and Billy were in different rooms, but we were all partying in Andrew's room that he shared with Ricky. I got a little too drunk and my friend put me to bed. She said that she was going to Billy's room and asked if I would be okay with Andrew, and I said yes. Keep in mind my friend didn't have a phone either, so we basically had no way of getting in contact with each other. Another stupid thing, I know. So I'd been in the bed for a while with Andrew, just talking and chilling when he says, "I just have to pop out and I'll be right back." I assumed he meant just out of the bedroom, not out of the actual hotel room, but he left the hotel room to get something from Billy's hotel room. Anyway, I was just watching TV in the bed when the bedroom door opens and I assumed it was Andrew, but my heart sank when it was Ricky, the weird colleague. He walked into the room and sat on the bed. Keep in mind, I'm very naked at this point, trying to cover myself up with a blanket. He said, "You do realize that everyone has left you alone in here, right? It's just you, all alone. No one is here, and no one can hear you," and continued edging closer and closer to me on the bed. At this point, I was completely speechless and absolutely terrified. I was completely frozen in fear, and I had no idea what to do. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. He definitely sensed my fear, and for some reason, he just got up and left. A sense of relief flooded me, and I felt silly for overreacting. That was until I heard JD, the other random colleague, shouting, "Get the fuck back in here! What are you doing? This isn't what we discussed. Get the fuck back in here and do what you were meant to do. Who gives a fuck about that whore? Just get back in there and do what you need to do." I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in because I was so scared. But there was no way out, and the only way out of the hotel room was through the front door, and I had to walk past Ricky and JD to get there. I was just so terrified. I had a million thoughts rushing through my head, and I had no idea what to do, but I knew I had to escape. I decided my only option was to just leave the room and be ready to defend myself if things were to go pear-shaped. I threw my clothes on and grabbed my shoes. I opened the door, and Ricky and JD were sitting on a couch close to the bedroom door. JD said, "Hey, sexy, where are you going in such a rush? Come and join us. Come here right now." I said, "No thanks," and ran to the front door and ripped it open. When I got out, I was so relieved, but I was still in a random hotel in a random city with no way to contact my friend. But I thought my best option was to go to the hotel lobby and just wait. As I was walking, I heard two men yelling down the hall, "Where are you? We know you aren't too far away. Come back and join us. You know you want to." It was Ricky and JD. I was absolutely fucking terrified by this point. I began sprinting to the elevator. I could hear them gaining on me. I never knew I could run so fast, but I just continued and didn't look back. I felt like I was running forever until I reached the end of the corridor and my worst nightmare had come true. I missed the turn off of the elevator. Fucking idiot. So I had to turn and run back towards where I could hear Ricky and JD still yelling down the hallway. I found the elevator and got in. I could hear their voices getting louder and louder, and I didn't want to imagine what would happen if they got into the elevator with me. The door finally closed after what felt like a lifetime. I thought I would go down to the lobby and just wait there, because at least there would be people there, so there would be some form of safety. I got to the lobby and realized that there was no one in sight. No one at all, not even behind the desk. I sat on a couch and didn't know what to do with myself. I was absolutely terrified that Ricky and JD would come to the lobby. Then I heard the elevator ding and the door open. My heart dropped, but it was Andrew. I told him what had happened, and he was outraged that his colleagues did that, and he took me to where my best friend was. Everything turned out fine, but it could have been a lot worse. So Ricky and JD, let's never meet again.
My uncle once told me this story about him and his wife when they were on their honeymoon about 2 decades ago. He said that they had rented a hotel for the night, and once they were about to sleep, they had started to smell a really weird odor, and the bed felt really squishy. My uncle, who I'll now refer to as Eric, called the person in charge of the lobby and requested someone to clean their room early in the morning. Eric was having trouble falling asleep while his wife, who I'll now refer to as Jessica, was already sleeping. Eric decided to take a shower. He grabbed a blanket and decided to sleep on the floor. The very next morning, Eric and Jessica went into the lobby and requested for a manager. Once when the person in charge in the lobby finally called their manager, Eric told them that the room smelled really weird and he would really like a new one. The manager told Eric that all of the rooms were currently occupied, but that he would send a janitor to clean out the room. Eric agreed with this, and him and Jessica then headed out to go spend the day together. Once it was getting a little late, they had got to their room. Jessica had told Eric that she was going to take a shower, so Eric said okay, and while he was on the phone with someone, there was that same nasty odor yet again. Being really frustrated, he wanted to find out exactly where that odor was coming from, so he decided to check the cabinets and everything else. That's when he then got near the bed and noticed that the odor was really strong now. He removed the first mattress, and then to his horror, he started to scream. That's when he then saw that there had been a dead body underneath the mattress that entire time. He said that the guy looked around his late 30s. Eric grabbed the phone from the room and locked himself in the bathroom where his wife was taking a shower. That's when Jessica asked him if everything was okay and why he was screaming. Right at that moment, my Uncle Eric then passed out. Jessica had to get out of the shower and call 911. Eric had to go to the hospital, but he ended up being okay. The police were already at the hotel questioning the staff on what happened, but they never found the murderer. To this day, it still really makes them sick to their stomach thinking of how they slept on a dead body. That's pretty much the end of it. Eric and Jessica eventually just went to their home and decided to call it a night. They never heard back from the police, and to this day, they still have no idea who was responsible for the body.
This happened back in 2010. I was working in a hotel in a suburban area. It was a nice place. When I first started there, I was both a part-time front desk clerk and a part-time night auditor. For those of you not in hospitality, I closed the day out on the computers on the overnight shift. I had just been promoted to a day job and had a week left at the front desk before I was switching to my Monday through Friday gig. And it was just like any other night. At about 3 a.m., I received a phone call. The guy sounded my age, mid-20s, and attempted to strike up a conversation with me. I have to get my name when answering the phone, so he gets my name, of course, and starts asking me personal questions. Do you have a boyfriend? Would you want to go out for a drink? Which were harmless, but nevertheless, I tell him I'm hanging up as I had a job to do. He wouldn't give me a name. Instead he said, "Why don't you call me John?" I hang up and finish my shift. The next night, at about 3:30 a.m., I receive another phone call from John. He started off with asking me out for a drink again, to which I declined and hung up the phone. He called back about 5 times that night, each time getting more lewd in his comments, and just tried to keep me talking. He ended his last call with the phrase, "I see you like singing karaoke. I love doing that. Let's go out together sometime." Shit, I think. He found me on Twitter. I had just gone out a few nights prior with my friends and posted about it. I asked him how he got my full name, and he wouldn't tell me. I hung up again, and he was done for that night. I deleted my Twitter and Foursquare pages, and when my boss came in at 7 a.m., I told him what had been going on. We told my general manager, and my security guard put it into his report. I only worked 2 overnights a week, luckily, but when I came back the next week, so did he. The phone call started around 3 a.m. and lasted for an hour or so, but this time was a little different. John was angry that I had deleted my accounts so he couldn't keep an eye on me and make sure I wasn't cheating on him. I told him to fuck off and that I'm not answering the phone anymore and that my security guard would be taking all of my calls going forward. The phone was quiet for about 10 seconds and then he screamed,
"You're gonna be with me whether you like it or not. I'm coming for you,"
and hung up the phone. I, of course, freaked the fuck out and called the police. Luckily, I had my security guard there, so I wasn't completely alone. But it must have been a slow night because it took the cops mere minutes to get there. I called my night supervisor who left at 11 p.m. and he managed to calm me down. One cop was nice enough to stay until my shift was done. And with that, I told my boss that even though I had a week left of overnights, I couldn't and wouldn't do it. Thankfully, they understood, and I moved to daytime hours, as well as sent an email out to everyone, telling them that anyone who called for me was sent directly to the GM. Thankfully, everything stopped after that, minus a few phone calls the security guy got for about a week. He told the guy that I had quit because of him, and the call stopped. Still creeps me out though. We think he may have been a former guest at the hotel, but I never found out who it was.
Please, don't judge some of my incredibly stupid decisions of my creepy encounter. I was very young. So, when I was 15, my sister and I ran away from home. Dumb decision number 1. I was gone for a total of about 6 months. At some point, for about 2 weeks, we were living in a run-down motel. One night, while I was by myself, I was sitting on the stairs of the motel, flipping through a magazine. Stupid decision number 2. A grown man walks by me and starts to talk to me. He asks my name and why I am sitting outside. I asked him if he is a cop. Extremely stupid decision 3, since this shows him I do not want cops involved as I was a runaway. He asked, "Do I look like a cop?" He didn't. He said he had some alcohol in his room. He was willing to share if I'd like to come up and drink with him. At 15, to me, free alcohol sounded great. I said okay and went with him to his room. Stupid decision number 4. We got to his room and began drinking and talking a bit. I forget what I asked him, but at some point I asked him something that made him get out his ID and show it to me. Under his name, I noticed it had offender under his name in red. Warning bells went off, and I asked him what that meant. He replied, "What do you think it means?" At that point, I just want the hell out of there. As I'm thinking that, an additional grown man walks into the room. He sees me, smiles, and they both nod to each other. I am now in a locked motel room with 2 grown men. I turn to the first guy and tell him something, like I have to get something out of my room real quick and then I'll be right back up. I must have sounded believable. He said, "You'll come right back?" I said, "Of course. I want to keep drinking." He then asked what room number I was in. I lied and made up one, of course. By the grace of God, he let me out of that room. I briskly walked back to my room. Not even a minute later, the phone rings. I pick it up. "Why did you lie to me?" I said, "What do you mean?" "You lied about your room number. I watched you go into your room." I told him it must have slipped my mind as I was talking to him earlier. He then told me to come back upstairs to his room so we can keep hanging out. I told him I'd be right up. I then proceeded to unplug the phone from the wall and curl up in a ball since I was so afraid he would try to come for me. I still to this day do not know why he let me leave. He didn't have to. Lord knows what would have happened to me that night. Scary to think since I was a runaway. No one would have known anything. I had no ID and was going by a different name. I looked up what offender means. Most websites say it means the person is a sex offender or out on parole. I was so lucky that night. Surprisingly, though, it took me becoming an adult to really realize the danger I was in that night. To me at 15, he was a creepy guy, and I instinctively knew I had to get out of there. But it wasn't until years later that I really understood how bad that situation could have become.
So it was early 2020, and I was on a trip with my friend in London. We're two 22-year-old girls and just wanted to spend the weekend looking around the galleries and getting to feel the city as we were thinking of moving there. We were staying in kind of a dingy hostel in East London, but we were barely ever there. We stumbled in late at night after being out most nights. We were in a shared room with two other sets of bunk beds. Most nights we weren't really aware of any others being in the room, other than the odd snorer who was gone by morning. But our last night, a new person had arrived. We noticed he laid out his clothes neatly on the bed, and all his shoes were lined up perfectly against the wall. He was sleeping under the duvet, despite his clothes being left on the top of the bed. Almost like he heard us coming up and jumped into bed before we came into the room. The lights were on too. We were both pretty drunk, so didn't take much notice and went to sleep ourselves. The next morning we were flying home on a really early flight, like 6 a.m. When we woke up around 3:30 a.m., he was already awake, and while we were both getting our things together, we noticed that he was taking his stuff out of his bag methodically, in a really particular order. He was muttering under his breath, but wasn't saying anything that we could make out, but kept laughing to himself and got progressively louder. We both text back and forth about how odd he seemed to be, but we were leaving soon, so we weren't too worried about it. I walked into the bathroom to brush my teeth, the door slightly ajar. My friend was directly outside finishing up her makeup, so I didn't see the point of shutting the door and locking it just to brush my teeth. Seconds after I walked in, he walks in. I froze, but then I thought I should act as normal as possible, instead of reacting or freaking out, as that might cause him to lash out, and I could already tell that he wasn't totally normal. While I'm standing there brushing my teeth, he stares into the mirror at himself for about 20 seconds, almost glaring at himself. He seemed angry. He started grinding his teeth and grunting too. Then he switched and tapped on and started flinging water at his face, most of it flying behind him or down his clothes. He kept making grunting sounds, and they were getting louder. Bear in mind, I was about 2 feet away from him brushing my teeth. I completely freak out and swallow my toothpaste without rinsing and walk out the bathroom. My friend was sat outside, her eyes wide, and she was shaking. She said when I walked into the bathroom, he stopped what he was doing, stared at my friend, smiled really creepily, and then walked in after me, keeping eye contact with her, which was odd because he never tried to make eye contact with me. We grabbed our stuff and ran downstairs. At first, I was tired, and I didn't fully process how weird it was, but looking back, it could have been really dangerous and was definitely very weird. Creepy man who decided to join me in the bathroom, I hope I never see you again.
My fiancé, Will, and I stayed in upstate New York a couple of weeks ago for a mini getaway. The hotel was pretty dingy, but the price was right and they had smoking rooms. One night we had gotten back from dinner around 11 p.m. when Will decided he wanted a soda. The hotel didn't have any elevators, so we started the trek to the lower level vending machines. Once we got to the first floor, we started walking down this long hallway. Think The Shining, when I see an open hotel room door. While passing, I glance inside and see an older woman standing in the middle of a dark room, pulling at her hair with her fists with a huge smile on her face. I instantly start having a mini panic attack. I look to Will, and he obviously hadn't seen this deranged woman. Will says, "I think we're walking the wrong way. Let's turn around." We turn around and walk back by her room, but I don't look inside. We keep walking down this insanely long hallway, and when we're far enough down, I whisper, "Baby, there's something going on in one of those rooms. Something's not right." He stops walking to ask me about it when we see a sign for the vending machines, and they're back by that fucking room. We turn to walk back down the hallway when we see an arm sticking out from the woman's room and waving around slowly. Not waving hello exactly, just very slowly wobbling back and forth. Then her door slams shut and we hear all the locks click. I start freaking out more and saying I don't want to go back there, but Will says the room is next to the lobby and an attendant is there, so if anything happens, we can just run to the desk. We walk back by the room and make it to the vending machines, in a little closet-type room right off of the lobby. I start putting change in the machine, and of course I only have nickels and dimes, so it's taking me forever. All of a sudden, I get that feeling that someone is staring at me. I turn to the doorway, and the woman is standing there with this huge smile on her face, just staring at us. What really creeped me out is that we had to walk through 3 heavy doors to get to this room, which means she had purposely, silently snuck through. Will and I just freeze and stare straight ahead, pretending like we don't see her. I've stopped putting change in the machine at this point and just look like a statue. Then she starts giggling, a high-pitched little girl giggle. Out of the corner of my eye, I see she put her hands over her mouth like a schoolgirl. I start silently crying. I'm frozen to the spot just listening to this old, crazy lady giggling like a 5-year-old while staring at me. Then she just turned around and walked away. Will grabs the soda and we book it out of there. We ran all the way back down the long hallway, up 4 flights of stairs and into our room while looking over our shoulders the entire time. I propped a chair under the door and couldn't sleep the entire night. Didn't see the woman the next morning. So, deranged woman in the New York hotel, please, please, let's never meet again.